like the water that flows without form, or the wind that cannot be seen. In the Pokemon world, the truth is rarely what it seems. So take a seat, open your mind, and step into another journey to Pokemon's greatest mysteries. Who is Erika? Or rather, who was she originally meant to be? Within the Pokemon community, the original sprite of the Celadon City gym leader has sparked a lot of curiosity, mainly because it almost looks like she's levitating her Pokeball. With all the last-minute changes that happened during Generation 1's development, many have theorized that Erika might have originally been intended as a psychic-type gym leader. Personally, I've never given much weight to those theories. I've always felt that her sprite subtly reflects her grass-type nature instead. Something more like a quiet, mysterious girl, sitting as if she were contemplating a spring landscape, letting the Pokeball gently slide through her hands, like a petal falling. However, as time has passed, and with all the secrets we've uncovered about these games, I've had to reconsider my stance. Maybe, after all, they did have another plan for Erika. In her original Kin Sugimori's concept art, we can already see some differences compared to her final sprite. For starters, her eyes are no longer gently closed in a contemplative expression, but instead show a colder, slightly melancholic gaze. But more importantly, in these concept arts, the gym leaders were, for some reason, numbered, and Erika is marked as number 5, even though she ended up being the 4th gym leader in the final games. This adds weight to the idea that there were changes during development that affected both the order and roles of the gym leaders, including her. But the most surprising part is that in the concept map of Kanto, the cities were also numbered, and Erika's number 5 was assigned to none other than Lavender Town, a place that, back in the day, gave rise to all kinds of urban legends. But the actual idea and concept behind it are far more unsettling than all those legends myths. Because, as you probably know, Kanto is based on Japan's real Kanto region, and in the location where Lavender Town is supposed to be, there's nothing but sea. So what if Erika really was levitating her Pokeball, but not as a psychic type leader, but as a ghost type, the gym leader of that lost town? Because there's a small but telling detail, both in her concept art and in her red and blue sprite. She wears her yukata with the right side over the left, the opposite of how it's traditionally worn. In Japan, that way of dressing is reserved for funerals. In fact, that detail was changed starting in Pokemon Yellow, as if they were trying to hide that dark origin. But there's still one piece that doesn't quite fit. Agatha. Having 2 ghost-type specialists in a first generation where there was only a single evolutionary line of that type sounds strange, right? Well, it's known that Agatha, despite being conceptually tied to ghost types due to her connection with the afterlife, was technically a poison-type trainer in Generation 1. But what's more interesting is that in the beta, her team was completely different. She didn't specialize in a single type at all. Instead, she was more of an elemental master, with the 3 evolutions, Tauros and Tangela. And there's another coincidence. Was Tangela originally intended to be a ghost type and the signature Pokemon for both trainers? But I want to focus on her Tauros. Oak's unused beta team also included one of these, and overall, both teams share a very similar structure. The game itself hints that something happened between Oak and Agatha in their youth, and maybe the original plan was to explore that relationship much further. The former champion, once the strongest trainer in the world, now retired and devoted to research, and his rival Agatha, whose mastery over all kinds of Pokemon pushed him to his limits. A perfect setup for our battle against Blue, and one that would have left the role of Ghost-type Master open. Thinking about all the stories that were left buried in the depths of the cartridge leaves a bittersweet feeling. But with all of this, maybe we can better understand one of the most mysterious aspects of Generation 1. Its intro, a completely different one from the rest. While later games showcase legendaries, starters, characters, prominent figures of the region, the first one simply shows a battle between Nidorino and Gengar. I can understand the choice of Gengar, Ken Sugimori's favorite Pokemon and one of the stars of the first generation, but Nidorino? It's definitely not the first thing that comes to mind as a protagonist. It's a strange battle in itself. Who would send out a Nidorino against a Gengar? Most of its moves don't even affect it, except for Poison Sting, one of the weakest moves to begin with, that Gengar resists fourfold. The intro is the game's first impression, a statement of intent, so there has to be a reason why they chose it. And there is. Because easy as it is to overlook, Nidorino is one of the most important Pokemon in the entire franchise. It was literally the first Pokemon ever seen, the one Oak sends out in his introduction to show us what a Pokemon is. In other words, it's very possible that the Nidorino in the intro belonged to Professor Oak, and that the battle we see was against Agatha, back when they were young. And that only makes my imagination run even further. But beyond that Nidorino, the Nidoran line itself is quite mysterious. Why would two seemingly ordinary poisonous rabbits be the only ones to have gender differentiation in Red and Blue, a mechanic that already existed in that generation, but wouldn't be officially introduced until the next? It wasn't even used for Pokemon that we already knew could only be one gender, like Kangaskhan. Well, in the original editions, Red and Blue, Green in Japan, Nidoran was a Pokemon typical of the Safari Zone, a preserve of Pokemon brought from different parts of the world that cannot be found in common routes. It would not be until Yellow and later remakes that it became a more common species across the region. Nidorino and Nidorina are rare enough to be offered as prizes in the casino. Not to mention, Giovanni specializes in Pokemon with a certain prestige from that same safari, like Rhyhorn, the Nidoran line, and Kangaskhan. It starts to feel like Nidoran was never truly native to Kanto, but something introduced. Still, it did appear in one other place in the original games, Route 22, the same route that later connects to Mount Silver and Johto, a natural border where foreign species might cross into the region. And in Pokemon Gold and Silver, Nidoran of both genders can be found on routes 35 and 36. Does it seem plausible that this was their true home? There's also a strange detail. A Nidoran caught in the Safari Zone of Kanto can hold TM43 Detect when transferred through the time capsule, a move that didn't even exist in the first generation, which suggests that perhaps that item was never meant to belong to Kanto at all. Maybe it only becomes real once it returns to Johto, where it was always meant to be. But another possible case of a Kanto Pokemon with unexpected origins is Dragonair. Not lances, nor the ones you can raise yourself chasing the dream of flying across Kanto on the back of a Dragonite. I'm talking about one Dragonair in particular, whose origin remains a mystery to this day. Because as you know, Dratini, the only dragon type in Kanto, can be found in the Safari Zone, making it one of its most prized catches. But what not so many people know is that in Yellow and remakes, it's actually possible to catch a Dragonair with a chance of just 1%. A mystical Pokemon, almost like a living rumor within the region. And it has something that distinguishes it from other wild Dragonair in the series, which are usually equipped with dragon scales. This one can hold a Dragon Fang, an item that increases the power of dragon-type moves. But here's where things stop making sense. This item is typically associated with Pokemon like Bagon or Druddigon, creatures that actually possess fangs and use biting techniques. Dragonair's line doesn't. They don't learn Bite, they don't learn Crunch, they don't even have visible fangs. So, where did it come from? If Dragonair couldn't have produced that fang, then it must have taken it from somewhere else. And in a region like Kanto, where no other wild dragons exist, that somewhere else starts to feel very far away. Like the Dragon Spiral Tower on the borders of Unova, a place where Dragonair and Druddigon coexist. Maybe some of these Dragonair proved their strength there, defeating their rivals. Or dragging them into the water, where Dragonair would be helpless, taking their fangs as trophies, and carrying that power with them. And then, somehow, they ended up in the Safari Zone, another exotic species brought from afar. Maybe one day, an even more special Dragonair would appear there, one that had witnessed the return of what was once the original dragon of legends. But time flies, and 3 years after the events of the first generation, Kanto, now free from all the obstacles the player once faced, feels especially nostalgic and strangely emotional. A lot changed during that time, but one of the most surprising was the takeover of Viridian Gym by the legend himself, Blue. What could have made the ambitious prodigy from Pallet Town step aside and take the vacant role of gym leader? Maybe the answer lies in the building itself. Since Viridian's original leader was Giovanni, the boss of Team Rocket, it was a nice touch that the remakes brought back something as iconic as the Rocket hideouts, those sliding arrow tiles. But in the original games, the gym was far more mysterious. Completely empty, no trainers, no underlings, Blue simply waits there with an aura somewhere between legend and resignation. And yet, the place was decorated with something that looked like Lego pieces? That detail remained an unsolved mystery for years until the community began to theorize that it might reference an old Nintendo product. Before becoming the giant we know today, Nintendo specialized in traditional toys, and in the 1960s they released a line called N and B, meant to compete directly with Lego. The line saw some popularity, and these products have appeared referenced in a few games. Even so, it still felt like a strange choice for such an important location, especially for Blue, a character whose presence deserved something more tied to his story. That's when YouTuber Smith Plays Pokemon brought a new perspective. Looking at it more closely, those shapes could also be seen as something far more fitting: Pokeballs. Rows and rows of them, displayed like trophies in green showcases. And if we follow that idea, we can actually count them. There are 224 Pokeballs in that room, meaning Blue would have 224 Pokemon on display, just 27 short of completing the full 251 of Generation 2. So which ones are missing? The 11 legendaries that either Red or the Johto player can obtain, the 3 Johto starters and their evolutions, 9 Pokemon in total, which wouldn't be available to him if we assume, as his dialogue suggests, that he never met Professor Elm and Unknown, since the ruins of Alph remain unsolved until the player arrives, implying we're the first to uncover them. Add to that the 6 Pokemon on his current team, likely taken from that display, and you get those missing 27. A perfect 251. So maybe Blue's ambition never faded at all during those 3 years. If he couldn't surpass Red in battle, then he would beat him where it all began, completing the Pokédex. And the vacant Viridian Gym would be the perfect base of operations, right next to Pallet Town where his grandfather could evaluate his progress, and right at the border between Kanto and Johto, a strategic point to move freely between both regions. Of course, Red is waiting nearby, so maybe Blue won't completely rule out challenging him to a rematch once the Pokédex is complete and the final team has been assembled, but Red's own team also holds certain mysteries waiting to be solved. It's well known what that final battle symbolized. It was time to show all that you have learned and grown as a trainer in the 3 years between first and second gen, facing none other than your past self. Past that, at the time, corresponded most immediately to the yellow version, in which we embodied this character for the last time, with his team being inspired by the most iconic Pokemon of that last adventure. First, we have Pikachu, his starter who, despite not having anything special or being particularly strong, would have forged a unique bond with him as a faithful squire. Then, one of the 2 Snorlax blocking the road, which he had to wake up and battle to move forward. It's implied that he would not get to face the other, and that's why it appears in the second gen, getting much stronger in those 2 years and settling outside of Vermilion City, possibly attracted by the food of the fairies in the port. The 3 starters are also available in the yellow version, from a girl who takes care of injured Pokemon and gives us Bulbasaur, a bad trainer who was unable to raise his Charmander, and Officer Jenny, who gives us a Squirtle, who was always getting into mischief. All of them fully evolved, with Red being able to bring out the potential of such different species. And finally, the team would be completed with one of the symbols of the first gen, the Eevee from the Celadon Mansion, evolved into Espeon after arriving in Johto, a region where this transformation is possible if the Pokemon has been raised with love, but...
What?
We find this opponent at the very top of the world, reflecting how the most important battle is against yourself, and Game Freak has made this clear by making him the pinnacle of power in the series. Even when several characters with higher level Pokemon appeared after the second gen, the remakes helped him so that his Pikachu still had the highest level seen in a trainer's Pokemon, which to me is a deliberate choice to keep Red at the top. But in those same remakes, his beloved Espeon was surprisingly replaced with the Lapras from Silph-Co, a Pokemon just as special and representative of the adventure, but which by type overlaps with Blastoise and definitely fits much worse in his team. Even when it can take advantage of the hail at the top to use Blizzard, it still doesn't provide enough coverage and complete the team as well as Espeon. There must be some reason for a change like this, perhaps a message that we've been overlooking all these years. If we look at the sprites of this character, the red in Gold, Silver, and Crystal would be the one from Yellow, while in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, he would be his reincarnation from the remakes, Leaf Green and Fire Red. Maybe that's the answer to these changes. In Pokemon Leaf Green and Fire Red, Eevee is obtained on the hidden roof of the Celadon Mansion, a strange place inhabited by an NPC who says that there's nothing that he doesn't know and encourages us to read his blackboard, in which there is a subtle difference from the first games. It explains the wireless adapter, a peripheral introduced in those editions, and a new method of trading Pokemon with your friends that didn't exist in the original Kanto. And it's right there where we get Eevee to imply that Red would be interested in that mechanic and would trade it after that. It may seem stupid to trade a creature as special as Eevee, but it might not be so crazy if you were to receive something with the same value instead, because even though it may not be so obvious at first glance, there is another different Pokemon on Red's team. Think about it. If the red in Gold and Silver was the one from Yellow, it makes sense to keep the starter Pikachu out of fondness and chemistry. But if the red in Heart Gold and Soul Silver is the one for Leaf Green and Fire Red, why is Pikachu still here? It was no longer a starter Pokemon in those games, which would make it a random one from Viridian Forest, right? Well, that may not be the case. In the remakes, Red's Pikachu knows Volt Tackle, a move impossible for a wild Pikachu to know. The only way to get it is as an egg move, with one of its parents holding a light ball. But you can't get that item in Kanto, and the original Red's Pikachu wasn't holding it either. Many clues seem to point to this Pikachu as a totally different one. Doesn't it fit perfectly that Eevee was traded for this very special Pokemon? One born in Hoenn from a Pikachu with a light ball caught in the Safari Zone, holding the item as a bonus gift in the trade, one that would become infinitely more powerful than a regular Pikachu and would earn a place in his team. If it had another trainer ID number, it could even be explained that it has a higher level than the rest of his team due to the boost in experience that the trade provides. Too bad we didn't get to face May or Brendan as protagonists to see that canonical Umbreon or Espeon in their team. But that may not be all, because this only raises many more questions. If we are really dealing with the red from Leaf Green and Fire Red, then how did he get Venusaur, Blastoise, and Charizard, which are also not available simultaneously in these games? One of the three would simply be the character's real starter. So for the example, let's think that he chose Venusaur, but we can change them indistinctly. You would also have to get Charizard and Blastoise by trade. trade. But from whom? Well, the main suspects would undoubtedly be Blue and Green or Leaf. Being part of the Pallet Town legendary trio, they're the ones who canonically chose the other two starters. And since we're talking about more modern generations, they could very well have hatched eggs to help Red complete the Pokédex. In Let's Go, both had one of the starters, which in a way reinforces the theory, even if the games are not part of the main line. Both also have, in their various appearances, Pokemon only obtainable by trade, so they are known to be regular users of this mechanic. Let's not forget that these Pokemon know the infamous Frenzy Plant, Blast Burn, and Hydro Cannon, moves introduced with the move tutor of the Sevi Islands, which again support the theory and point to the Red of the remakes and not the one from the first gen. How do we put all these puzzle pieces together? Well, one possible interpretation is that the battle against Red was indeed meant to reflect our progress in these 3 years, but in a very limited way, because we have simply gotten stronger. By contrast, the Red of the remakes would portray the full extent of a trainer. The opponent in front of you is not only strong, but has deeply explored all the wonders that the Pokemon world has to offer. Trades beyond the limits of space and time, breeding, egg moves, trust and happiness, learning and evolution. With the wireless adapter as a symbol, his Pikachu represents the link with Hoenn made possible by the network machine, while his starters embody the trade with other cartridges in Kanto, a classic of the first gen, linked together with all. The names Gold and Silver have a certain connotation of conflict, a struggle between the best and the second best, but by adding the suffixes in the remakes with a heart of gold and a soul of silver, they instead complement and inspire each other. The original Red challenged us to become a more formidable opponent, while the one from the remakes encouraged us to become a better trainer with all that this means. Now, what happened in the universes where the villains won? Why was Chris removed from the remakes? Click on the video on screen to uncover even more mysteries of the Pokemon world.